So I think just following on from that, the question and answer session that we just had, there's a real sense of growth within the accountability sector of Causal AI. And Ben, do you have anything that you would like to sort of add and give some insight on regarding this very
Yeah,
issue?
I mean, it's hugely important. And there's a discipline called model risk management. And the concept of model risk management, it really became popular after 2007, 2008, the financial crisis. And the idea is that every model that a company is using should be in inventory, and every model should have a model owner, as in who is accountable for the model, who is responsible for the model, so that we never get a situation, this is from the company's perspective, where the owner leaves and we get an orphan model that doesn't belong to anyone, so no one knows what's going on with it. Now, the challenge with accountability has been solved for banking and financial sector models. Where we see a problem now is around things like self-driving cars. So if a self-driving car crashes, who do you sue? Who's got the insurance? Is it the driver who wasn't really driving because the Tesla was? Is it the company that made the hardware? Or is it sort of the AI that's driving the car if it's not the car's technology that was driving it? So I think that might explain why the self-driving movement hasn't moved as quickly as it could have done. And we're going to see the same problem with generative AI, which is who's really accountable for the models that are coming out. So these large language models, who's responsible for them? Is it the user? Is it the person who built the model? Is it the person who decided which data was used to train the model? And that's a very hot topic. And again, an area perhaps where the philosophers can opine. So there's always going to be a role.
Yay! My subject's going to be useful. Okay. Yeah, no, that's really good. And again, Anirudh, what would you think? Do you see this as a promising avenue for AI, causal AI, and generally, or what's your opinions on that?
I think it seems to solve quite a few problems with what we currently have, in terms of being able or learning that the cause and effect part rather than just straight correlation. But I guess just to ask, what have been some some successful examples in recent years of causal AI in use, just to ensure that my current hypothesis is
Sure. So in the financial sector, it's still early days. In the econometrics and sort of policy area, I think it was 2021, the Nobel Prize for Economics went to 3 professors who were studying labor economics, and sort of they demonstrated that the conventional theory in economics is that as the price of labor goes up, fewer people are employed. So this sort of inverse relationship. And at least one of them, I don't know the details of the other 2, he got the Nobel Prize for some of his work demonstrating this didn't actually happen, which is you could impose a minimum wage in North America, I think New Jersey or Pennsylvania, one of those states, and it didn't impact the employment numbers as much as traditional economics would have done. So there's one sort of success story of causal techniques. More generically, where it can help with real world problems, if there's a huge amount of data, we can do a data-driven approach to causal discovery. But I want to emphasize that there is a lot of data that's needed, and the future needs to be sufficiently similar to the past that the training data is representative of what might happen. In the absence of that, the humans can create the causal graph. The humans can use their understanding of the domain they work in to explain these pairwise relationships. And in finance, in the area that I work in, that's actually the most valuable side, because finance and financial markets are not invariant. They do change over time. What drives financial markets today is not what will drive them in next month or next year, and certainly not what was driving them last year. So because the humans have a perspective on bits of the system, a causal graph can then be created out of different people's understanding of different parts of the system. So what this does is it creates a really practical way for people who understand financial markets in my case, but just the domain they're building a model in, to then work with the model developers. So typically model developers express models with Greek letters.
Yeah.
Now, typically people who aren't model developers don't like reading equations with Greek letters. And so it gives them a common language they can talk through. So the less technical people can say, if this goes up, that goes down. And then the quants can say, well, this formula can be expressed in this picture. And they both have a picture to look at, and they can discuss and debate it. So one of the things I always say and tell my students is that innovation is a team sport. So to make progress, you need to be able to explain your ideas and your model to others, and you need to incorporate their ideas efficiently. So these causal graphs that came out of Pearl's work are a great way to bring groups of people together to build models collaboratively.
I think that touches on a really cool point, because I don't know, in my head just now I was thinking about these models and how they could be used in, for example, things like humanitarian aid and like areas of global crises. I don't know why, they just sort of came to my head, because if, say, NGOs working in a certain area can sort of use these models to figure out certain causes, but also where things go up, things go down, and then obviously the technical people can look at the real data behind that. And there would be huge data sets, for example, with global crises or wars where humanitarian aid is needed. I feel like these models could be used like really, really specially in terms of how can we make this the most effective, efficient, and productive way of helping these people out there. I don't know, it's just a thought that I had. But it touches on a wider point regarding how these AI models and specifically causal AI, how does it impact decision making in industries such as finance or healthcare or law, where decisions and split-second decisions are made and they can have a profound impact?
I think it's different in different areas. And I think a big part of it comes down to the use case. So is it what we call a high stakes use case or a low stakes use case? Now, a high stakes use case in medicine will be, you know, do we give them this treatment while they're under anesthetic during, you know, where it's got major ramifications. So a high stakes use case has severe consequences. A low stakes use case, who cares what the outcome is? You know, recognizing cats on the internet is a low stakes use case. Playing video games is a low stakes use case. So the answer to your question, you know, how does it affect decision making, depends on the use case. And I think it's less about the choice of model or technique per se, and more about the domain. So in finance, if it's about making loans or deciding on the loans that are being made, it needs to satisfy the same financial regulator that a human decision would. In medicine, it would need to satisfy whatever requirements of the BMA or whatever the medical regulator is. In medicine, I believe that one of the areas it's being used as is that there's a third person at the table. It basically becomes like the human still makes a decision, but there's a model output as an additional person. Rather than just two doctors having a discussion and confirming what they think, there's now a model that acts as a third person with a third opinion. So a big part of how these things will evolve is for the regulators to catch up. Now, unfortunately, what we see time and time again is that innovation moves faster than regulation. So there's a lot of confusion about how and where and why. The simple answer is that don't worry about the model. Don't worry about the technology behind it. Just make sure the outputs still satisfy the regulators in whichever industry you want to use these things. And there's still a human who's the model owner. So if something goes wrong, there's someone who is accountable. Now, whether that's the CEO of the company or the chief executive of the hospital or the whoever, if you put someone's name against the output that's being made, you know, good things will happen. If we don't and we hide behind it, bad things will happen. So I'll just point out that the technical document that came out from OpenAI was anonymous. There was no one's name against it. And I think that's a problem. So we need to have individual accountability. And if it's not anyone lower down the food chain, it needs to be the CEO or the person at the top of the food chain.
Perfect. Thank you. And then just with that and with the previous question, I was just wondering, since causal AI is a system that can use cause and effect and it goes beyond this narrow machine learning, let's say could we say everyone were to implement a certain causal AI system into something like investments, surely that would change. And since everyone would be winning, since everyone has like the same system working, surely surely then it could have catastrophic implications because it could destroy the whole world. I mean, it's a very extreme example, but is that possible?
I think there's two parts to that question. So let me sort of take them one at a time. The first part is in financial markets. There's almost a tautology that's ironic, which is that systematic trading of financial markets only works if the financial markets always behave the same way. Financial markets will only behave the same way if there are less humans involved and more algorithms making the decisions. And because there are still humans involved, what will happen if we talk this through is that bubbles will sort of get created that are worse, and then there will be a correction at some point that will be more severe. So there'll be a decoupling between price and value, potentially. So you guys are probably, you're certainly, the meme stock phenomenon, GameStop, when during the pandemic, everyone started pumping up a video game seller in the US, was basically the decoupling of the price of the stock from what actually the value was, because it was being driven by sentiment. It was being driven by sort of the other just crazy belief that things will always ever go up. Now, of course, they went up ridiculously and then came down ridiculously. That's not to say there wasn't a lot of money made in the process, but there was this decoupling from fundamental value. So yes, if people start using causal AI or any model for that matter, any sort of systematic model, if everyone does that, we'll get big swings. But not everyone is going to do that, because there'll be people trying to take advantage of the other people who are creating algorithmic behaviors. They will try and preempt their algorithmic behavior to take advantage of that behavior. But that's it's an interesting field of study, and it's sort of, that is where the more exciting work's happening. The other point I wanted to address, which, sort of the fear of something really bad happening outside of finance. And I remember when I was your age, I think Terminator 2 just came out, this old Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. It must be about 20 or 30 years old now.
Yeah.
It was a classic at the time. And the big fear, it's about the AI taking over. And the big fear is that will what's going on now lead to that? Will the AI become sentient? Will the AI take on a mind of its own? Will ... insert nightmare doomsday scenario? Maybe. I don't know, to be honest. It won't happen soon, but potentially, maybe. But actually, I think there's a bigger worry, and that is what humans with bad incentives will do with it first. So the bigger risk is that humans that are motivated to do not positive things will be able to do it a lot faster, a lot quicker, and a lot more damage with some of these tools. So that I think is the clear and present danger. It's not the esoteric, is this the end of humanity? Will the machines sort of decide that humans will save the planet? I think that worry about what other humans will do now. That's the big. Can you hear me okay?
Are you on Frozen now?
Oh yes, we can see you and hear you now. We got up to.
Do you want me to just summarize? I can summarize. Or do you want to...
That was my monologue about the Terminators taking over the world.
We had the Terminator bit.
Yeah, I think
it was the bit after that.
Concluding that point regarding the present danger is not really, is this the end of humanity, but more
bad people using the technology.
Bad people with sensors.
That's it. You summarized it far more eloquently than I did.
Yeah, I think that's actually the real challenge more than anything, just because we've already been seeing, especially the highlighting regarding inequality, and also people trying to exploit others for monetary and other gains. And if they're given these models in a way where, again, like we were mentioning before, it's regulation after innovation instead of the other way around, it provides a lot more room and those grey areas for people to exploit others. And therefore, I think all that comes back to is our previous point of, if even while we're innovating and while we're trying to think of these new ideas, we have to make sure that there is regulations in place, there is fairness, there is equality or equity, however you want to phrase it, just to ensure that these issues don't become so magnified. Because I totally agree. I don't buy this narrative that, oh, is this the end of humanity? I think it's too big a question to answer right now. I think the more present danger, like you said, is rather, is this just going to magnify and amplify the growing inequality that sometimes can be perceived?
Completely. It'll give increased power to those with access to tools, potentially to exploit others in the information space. So basically, you probably get lots of emails and see lots of social media posts from people. Those people might not be people.
Yes.
Those people might be bots.
Yes.
But the power to now create and target you has gone up exponentially. So you have online profiles, your interests are out there. There'll be data vendors that sell your information, your hot buttons. So in terms of if some bad player wanted to create division in a country for bad reasons, or extract pounds from someone's wallet for commercial reasons, sort of the power to do that has gone up hugely.
And so with, oh, sorry.
No.
Oh, no. I was going to ask a question. So if there is what can be perceived as people abusing this technology, or when they may abuse this technology, how do we improve education surrounding the power of causal AI and AI in general?
I think, let me split it into sort of generative models and sort of text on social media. I'll address that first, and then sort of the causal AI section second. So with the generative AI large language models, look, I think there's going to come a time where we have to seriously question what we're reading on social media, if not in sort of elsewhere. So I think the verification, that there'll be an industry around verifying this is human written, or that this was written by someone. How do you prove that something was written by someone and who they are, who they say they are? I think that's going to be an interesting space to follow. It might, some people I speak to are predicting the end of social media, sort of the end of facts. You might look for jokes and memes on social media, but sort of there'll be a distinction between what do you believe versus what do you see as entertainment, because it'll be so hard to differentiate what is actually coming from a factual place. In terms of educating people, I think learning to think critically, learning to think, why is this appearing in my news feed? What do they know about me? They being the platform that is pumping something to me. What do they know about me that makes this more applicable to me and not someone else? So there may also be then movements to have sort of, if people can anonymize who they are, turn off cookie tracking, browse anonymously, to see an impartial view of the internet and social media. There may be movements in those directions as well.
I think also just the main thing regarding all of this is, when we talk about education, I think that's one of the reasons why we set up this podcast, isn't it, Anirudh? It's more like, there is so much out there and so many things which are going to become to the forefront of society, and this is one of them, that we need our listeners, and we as people need to be educated on to a certain extent to actually have an opinion on one, but also to, again, like you said, to be able to think critically. So I really appreciate the conversation that we've had, because again, for all our listeners out there, what this should do for you is, it should open your eyes to an opinion. What do you think about this? What do you actually want to know further about this, what do you think needs to be changed and improved? And if those conversations are happening in your head, then that's great, because then you can be more aware and more engaged with what's happening in the news, and then what's happening just generally around you with a topic like AI and causal AI, which is going to be, if not already, at the forefront of society. So I think the final question that I have personally is, what is the future of AI and causal AI, and how will they impact society? And I know that's a really broad question, but I guess with causal AI, where do you see the next steps going in the near future?
The next steps, I think, will be an understanding that the reality is somewhere between the doom and gloom and fear, but not as bad as that. And it's not as good as the hype. So one thing we haven't touched on, which is definitely happening, is that in technology, there's a hype cycle, which is when something new and shiny comes out, lots of startup companies try to capitalize on it, lots of venture capitalists try to fund them, and there's this sort of belief that this is the one thing that is like moving from the Stone Age to inventing the wheel, or discovering fire. Causal AI is important, but it's not like discovering fire. So I think sort of somewhere in between the fear, it's not as bad as people think, and the hype, it's not going to be as good as people think. The reality is somewhere in between. I think it will become part of how we teach maths. I mean, quite frankly, we've taught correlation and association for the last 50 years. And we've been saying correlation is not causation for that length of time. At least now we've now got an alternative approach, which I think is huge. It's already gone from sort of universities down to undergraduate level. I suspect it'll be taught at A level pretty soon, if not already. And it will sort of, the philosophy is, don't think about symmetrical correlations, think about a directional, what is causing what. So I think that'll happen, but I'll caveat by saying, what is the future of AI in general? The only certainty is we know there'll be more change. I'm sure there'll be unanticipated consequences, and I'm sure we'll be surprised by some of them. But that's been happening through every generation for as long as we can go back in the history books. So to bring it back to the history, for anyone, history and innovation and societal civilizations as they evolve, when the Romans invented the aqueduct or whatever, that was a technology innovation.
Yes. Thank you.